In the heart of Egypt's mighty kingdom, Moses returned with a message no king wanted to hear. Moses declared, "Let my people go." But the king's pride was stronger than his mercy. Moses warned Pharaoh that if he refused to listen to God, great judgment would fall upon Egypt. Pharaoh turned away with a mocking grin, refusing to listen to the warning God had sent through Moses. As the sun lowered over Egypt, Moses raised his staff above the Nile, and the first plague began. Suddenly, the water did not ripple, it curdled. It turned dark, thick as sludge, and the scent of decay rose instantly into the air. Fish rose to the top, bloated and sightless. Pharaoh refused to repent and turned away from the ruined river. But another plague was already rising from the waters. Frogs poured out of the Nile by the thousands, covering the streets and homes. The frogs invaded every corner of Egypt, filling sinks, bedrooms, and even the royal palace. Frogs swarmed the kitchens and ovens of Egypt until the land echoed with endless croaking. Even as frogs filled his palace, Pharaoh hardened his heart and refused to listen. The palace of Pharaoh was no longer filled with peace, but with the chaos of frogs invading every corner. The frogs died in massive piles across Egypt, and the terrible smell of decay filled the air. Desperate for relief, Pharaoh begged Moses to stop the plague and promised to let his people go. But as the last carcass was cleared away, Pharaoh slammed the heavy gates shut once again. Moses struck the dust of the earth, and the ground of Egypt began to stir with another plague. Tiny gnats rose from the dust in thick swarms, covering the people and animals across Egypt. The gnats crawled across their skin without mercy, tormenting everyone throughout the land. Then came the flies, arriving in clouds so dense they blotted out the midday light. They descended on the crops, stripping the fields, turning the vibrant green of the valley into a brown, barren wasteland. Pharaoh stood in the center of the courtyard, his hands swatting uselessly at the air. Withered mess, his face twisted into a mask of pure fury. He refused to yield. The final blow came from the pastures. Cattle, sheep, and oxen collapsed in the fields, falling in silence as life left them all at once. Pharaoh sat upon his throne, his jaw locked, eyes cold and unmoving as the kingdom withered around him. Moses reached into the hearth, grabbed a handful of fine ash, and flung it toward the heavens. It did not scatter. It settled, and within moments, painful, burning boils erupted on the skin of every person in the city. The magicians clutched their limbs, unable to stand before him. Then the air grew heavy, with a low, vibrating hum that rattled the stone foundations. A crack of thunder split the sky, and stones of ice began to fall. The hail smashed the flax and the barley into the dirt, crushing the last of the harvest. Before the ice could melt, a new sound rose from the horizon. A black cloud, miles wide, swarmed over the valley. Locusts. They landed in such density that the ground vanished beneath them. Every leaf, every blade of grass, every branch was stripped and devoured. The world turned gray. Then another plague struck Egypt as the light suddenly vanished from the sky. A heavy darkness covered the land, so thick that no one could even see the person beside them. No one moved as Egypt sat trapped in a crushing darkness that swallowed every sound and every light. For 3 long days, the darkness covered Egypt like a heavy weight that no one could escape. Yet even in the terrifying darkness, Pharaoh refused to humble himself before God. As families across Egypt waited silently through the night for the final warning, a terrible silence swept through Egypt as the firstborn in every home lay still. Cries of grief rose across Egypt, for there was not a single house untouched by sorrow. The sound of mourning echoed through the night as all of Egypt cried out in despair. Egypt fell to its knees in sorrow as the weight of God's judgment swept across the land. It reached the palace walls, vibrating through the stone. Pharaoh sat in the darkness as the cries echoed around him. His pride, once hard as flint, fractured under the weight of the grief. Pharaoh walked slowly through the silent palace, broken by the plagues that had struck Egypt. He reached the palace gates, his hands trembling as he gripped the iron and threw them wide open. The path to the desert lay clear. He did not call out. He did not argue. He simply stood aside. Pharaoh stood in silence, his chest heavy, as the reality of his defeat settled upon him. Pharaoh silently pointed toward the distant desert horizon with a trembling hand. Finally, he commanded Moses and the people of Israel to leave Egypt at once. Moses raised his staff, a signal that sliced through the lingering echoes of grief. From the lanes and the courtyards, his people emerged. Thousands of figures moved in the moonlight, their faces set toward the open gates. They did not run. They walked with a heavy, steady rhythm that drummed against the dry earth. Moses took the lead, his stride long and purposeful, never once glancing back at the palace or the man standing in the doorway. A low roar of moving feet and hushed breaths drowned out the distant cries of Egypt. The people followed behind him, pouring out of Egypt and into the dark desert night. They walked past the ruined fields, beyond the Nile, and toward the unknown horizon ahead. Pharaoh stood alone at the gates of Egypt as the people disappeared into the dark desert night. At last, Moses led God's people forward, away from slavery, and toward God's promise of freedom.